Hello. Let's see if my slides show up here for a sec. So I'm Weston. When Philippe said a couple meetups ago who was here at the Ruby meetup in 2005, I think it was him and I. So I've been doing Rails for a long time, and I'm going to talk about Rails cantrips, right? I'll explain what that is in a minute. I'll just tell you a little bit about me. That's me. We make modern web applications for desktop, mobile, and today I threw in augmented reality. So a cantrip, how many people know what a cantrip is? Oh, not as many as I thought. So cantrip has absolutely really nothing to do with Ruby. It's a D&D reference. How many people have played D&D? Okay, so Kyle explained it really well to me a moment ago. He said a cantrip is a 0th level spell that you can cast as many times as you want. So it's just really simple little tricks. What I find interesting, because Rails is convention over configuration, is that there's lots of little bits of knowledge that you apply to every project. And these are little tiny bits of knowledge that I find I apply to almost every project. So some of them you probably will have seen. Some of them, I hope, even for people that have been doing Rails for a long time, you might not have seen. Maybe keep a little track. I'd be interested to know how many were new for people, or if this is all old hat for everybody. Maybe it'll apply a lot more to early Rails developers. How many people have been working for Rails under a year? How many people over 2 years? How many people over 3 years? How many people over 4 years? How many people over 5 years? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Rails is about 2005. Yeah. Okay. So this, for example, would be a cantrip. Just light a flame. Okay. So I've got these sort of organized into different little areas. Here's the first one. If you've used better errors can be used in conjunction with the web console that now comes with Rails. And one of the things that's cool is that when it shows an exception on your screen, the file where the exception is thrown with the line number is thrown at the top. I just recently learned that you can click on that file, and it is a TextMate handler, like txmt://, which is kind of dates the plugin because that works with TextMate, but a lot of people aren't using TextMate. You can actually, however, set this tiny little configuration variable that Better Errors Editor Sublime, and then use this little tool, Sublime Handler. I'll make these slides available, and you can click on the links and get more info. But what that means is you click on the link and it opens up in your editor. You're immediately at the spot where the exception was thrown. So it's kind of handy for shortcutting right to the file instead of going back into your editor and digging around. Here's another one. I use this on production. I also use it on my local machine. How many people use local RubyDoc or GemDoc? How many people just use the web for documentation? I'm more in the latter, so I just disable it, and my gem installs go way faster. So you can add that to a .gemrc or put it in a global etc. gemrc file. If you're doing a lot of Capistrano deploys or using Ansible or using other SSH automation, this is a really great little thing to throw at the top of your SSH config. Here I've got a host star, so that'll apply to all your hosts. That might be a little bit too wide open. You can specify it for a particular host if you want to lock it down a little bit more. But what that means is, with that little configuration, is every new SSH window or command that you use is actually going to get tunneled over the master control connection. So everything is way, way faster. It's worth the try. You'll find that everything with SSH gets way faster when you add that little bit in. So this is a .railsrc file. Again, instead of having to remember how do you specify Postgres on the command line when you do Rails new on a new project, I do client work, so I'm starting new Rails projects on a regular basis. You just create a little .railsrc file specifying which default database you want to use. This is another one I found fairly recently. It's called PGCLI. So you can symlink your PSQL command line to this. And what you get is you get auto completion and syntax highlighting. And then just open it up in Rails DB, and it's a much more powerful Postgres shell. So configuration. Now we're getting into Rails itself. All that other stuff was just sort of the environment as you're coming into Rails. This is something that I see in a lot of Rails projects that I inherit, is that Ruby code is put in lots of strange places. A lot of people say, well, just throw it in lib. But that's actually not a good idea, because if you add lib into your autoload pass, you're going to be loading your rake tasks. You're going to be loading all of those other template files and that your generators use, and all that stuff that actually shouldn't actually be in your production code when it's executing. So you don't want to throw things into lib. So you want to create a folder called extras. That's the name of the folder that the Rails docs recommends you use. But they don't have good documentation yet, and I should maybe open up a doc issue about how to eager load that code in production, which is again something that's good to do, because if you just have a bunch of code but you don't set eager loading, you're going to hit performance penalties, because it's going to have to go find the code, and then in the fork and exec it won't be able to share the code when it starts new processes from the main spawning process. So again, one of these little configuration things that I found, and I was like, you're going to do this on every project. The Arkansas post has a lot more detail about why this is a good thing. Here's another thing I find myself doing. When you first start a small Rails project, you can start throwing everything in the n.yaml file under locales, but very quickly you're going to find that it doesn't scale very well when you've got mailers and you've got views and models, and you want to start isolating and organizing your locales. So here's another tiny little thing that you're probably going to want to do in every project. I can't scroll out there, but it's the ** glob. There is what is going to create a recursive directory glob so that you can organize your locales. This one's pretty self-explanatory. You can set the secure flag on your session store cookie when you're not in the Rails environment, which will ensure that the session token is only served over HTTPS. You can use HTTPS only, which is a flag that Rails provides you, but it does a whole bunch of things, and you may want to have more granular control as opposed to sort of just flipping that switch and hoping Rails does the right thing. Here's another one that, again, the docs are a little bit in different places. So in bin setup that comes with Rails, you've got these few lines here. But when Rails actually installs, it actually creates a database YAML for you. First thing you're going to do in every new project, you're going to delete it. You're going to add it to .gitignore. You're going to create a .sample file and then uncomment these lines in bin setup. Part of the reason that's good is that it's part of when you're deploying the app on other environments, you can do the best practices that are in the 12-factor app about keeping your secrets out of your repository. This was another one that used to drive me crazy. How many people get Martian errors from Sidekick when they start up a different project every once in a while? So you send a delayed job sort of task into Sidekick, and then you'll get an error message, and you're like, what's that mailer? And then you realize you're sending a mail that was still in your Redis queue from another project. Redis has a really nice URI. That 2 on the end is saying use the second database project. So you can set up a environment variable, Redis URL, in each of your projects and make sure that all of your Redis databases are partitioned and you're not sharing the same database for all your projects, which is what they would be out of the box. You can set up that URL in the environment variable really easily if you use Brandon Keeper's .env project, which I also really like. How many people use .env? How many people use it on production? Interesting. I use it on production too. That's a blurb. Okay, so this is another one that I've pretty much applied to every project. Often on a web page, you're going to want to have a mail to, which has got an email link. If you just do that naively out of the box, you're going to be giving that email to the spam bots. With Gmail, it's not as much of a problem these days, but this is just a nice way of hiding that email address from the spam bots, because it puts a JavaScript obfuscation script around it. There used to be a gem called Gem Open. These days, though, Bundler will do the same functionality as the Gem Open gem. And what that is that this is super, super handy. So sometimes you get an exception thrown in your stack from a gem, or you want to know what's inside that method that you're calling on a gem, and you can just do bundle open the name of the gem, and it'll open it up in your editor, and you can poke around in the code. What's nice is that it's the actual running gem code, so you can actually hack away at it, modify it, throw in debugging, and you can specify the bundler editor environment variable, and then you can specify which editor it opens up in. So if you've been on a Rails project that's been around for a couple years, you're going to find that sometimes running all your migrations can be unwieldy. Also on legacy projects with various developers, different people have different policies on how they run stuff, and you may have surprises in your migrations. What I mean by that is you may have data transforms. So you're not just changing the schema, you actually have model code or transformations on code. But over time, when you refactor your code base, you may rename that model, but you may forget to do it in your migration. And then months, years pass. And then you run your migrations from scratch, hoping you can recreate your schema perhaps, and everything will fail horribly. So what's nice to do every once in a while is to collapse your migrations. So you can just pretty much take everything that's in your schema.rb file and put it inside the up section, and just get rid of all those migrations and clean up all the model and data code that's in there. One way you can also have a good policy of not having that problem in the first place is use rake tasks for your data migrations. So if you're going to do data migrations, under lib tasks, create a migrations folder, and then use rake tasks to do your data migrations. And I think I'm pretty much getting to the end here. This is a really simple way to get started with form objects. So we're getting a little bit of code now. So the wrapping form is basically a basic class that you inherit from. And where you would use it is often you have, the most common case would be like a user object, a user model. And have you ever run into the problem where you want to create a new user object and just give it an email and a password and start using it? But then the validations fail. Oh, you need to have a password confirmation. Oh, you have to have a first name and last name. Oh, someone else just added a new thing that the user's supposed to have, so you have to add that, and you add that. And then someone else added something else that's validation on the user object. What's great to do is to actually make those validations contextual based on where they're required in the app, keeping the user model itself more of a single responsibility principle, just persistence, moving the validations out to separate things. And a wrapping form is a good way of doing this in the simplest way. Doing is delegating the additional attributes that you want to validate in this current context, which is updating a profile. And then I'll see if I can scroll down and sort of show you. This isn't quite the same as live coding. Oh. Excuse my presentation skills here. So down there you can see in the update method, this is now in your controller, you just check if it's valid and then you save the user. What's really nice about this pattern is just how simple it is, and I really like simplicity in code. Part of the trick is in the first line of the update method, you just pass in all the attributes you want to update on the user. You throw it into the form. The form does the validation, but then you pop back out to the user to do the save if the form validation passes. Here's another one that I find really, really handy. And again, I use it on pretty much every project in my workflow. With Capistrano 3 and the net SSH tools underneath it, you've got some really powerful tools for doing remote procedure calls. And so you can just create a rake task that then can call remote rake tasks on whichever server you want. When you look inside of Capistrano, it actually has a migration role as a role inside there. So you just specify that in your cap config, and you specify which servers you want to run your rake tasks on. So then you don't have to SSH into a server and do any tooling around. You can just run arbitrary rake tasks. For example, those data migrations we talked about earlier. Similarly, down below, you can do the same thing with an arbitrary command. And again, if you look at my slides, you'll be able to see this stuff in more detail. And that is the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Some of this stuff is a bit opinionated. I'm sure I've offended somebody. So the question is, why do I care about setting the secure flag on the session cookie? So Rails out of the box used to give you, before I think it was Rails 4, would give you a session cookie that you couldn't mess with, right? So it had integrity checking. Now it has both integrity checking and it's encrypted. So your Rails session cookie, you don't need to necessarily do that. But I kind of tend to think about security not as like a single shot. I think of it as sort of security in depth. And maybe the session cookie isn't the best example, but it's more about how to set a secure cookie by using the secure flag. Does that answer your question? No? You mean, why would I bother if I've got an encrypted cookie? Yeah, I threw it in this slide about an hour and a half ago. Some of these things didn't have a ton of thought. I think it's more about, I find that if you don't set a secure, what I find is my complaint with Rails would be is that you have to work sometimes to get security. So if you want to have all your cookies have a secure flag, it would be a better example if you're using your own cookie for something, right? So it wasn't a session cookie, right? And you're putting something into a cookie, you're not doing all that overhead of authenticity or encryption. Well, then you could just ensure that its state would only be to the client and you not have to worry about man-in-the-middle attacks. So that would be a better example than the one I've provided here, probably. Is that a better answer? Yeah. Okay.
What's wrong with running .env in production?
It hasn't bit me yet. And I automate my production environment quite a bit. So I use Ansible pretty much on all my projects. And so I have a little Ansible role that sets up my Rails, and then there's a task in there that knows how to read variables and writes out the .env file for each environment. So it works great. I like it because you can put a .env.sample file that you commit for the development environment that all the developers can get up and use right away, and it works as documentation, right? Everyone is aware of what environment variables should be there, and then when you hand it off to ops or if you're doing your own ops, I mean, it's very clear where that is, right? So you just have to make sure now in your staging and production environments that you have those same environment variables set that you have in the sample file, and everything should work. What's cool is there is another gem that I thought about throwing in here where you can actually specify your environment variable dependencies that works with .env. So you can actually say this environment variable must be present, otherwise it'll throw an exception. because right now they fail silently until some point later down the road. Yeah. Jeremy?
Hey, Weston.
I don't know the name of that gem. Envy. That's it. Thank you. That is what. So it's NVIE, right? Okay. So that's the name of the gem that'll test that your environment variables are present.
Cool stuff. 10 years of Rails, and some of this is new. Can you go back a slide?
Sure.
What's the advantage of a wrapping form versus something like a sign-up service object in terms of like actually doing the save in the service object and returning positive or negative?
That's a good question. The service object style that I use in most of my code is pretty much a direct ripoff from the time I spent working with Philippe. So I just stole all his code. I had another slide, but I was like, actually, that's not my code. It's just straight Philippe, and we've seen that presentation. So I have a tiny little include. I call include service, which does one thing, which just it only has one method normally. I always try to use just call as an instance method. So I do the service object does a little bit of it lets you have an initializer, and then the class method creates new and then calls the instance method. And then the nice thing about that as well is it just has that simple interface. I always try to stick with just .call. In my own practice, I've had service objects that return a value or don't return a value. Most of the time now, I try to have service objects which are they're commands. You just fire them off, and they will do the right thing. If they fail, they'll throw an exception or log it or do something else. So I use form objects. Form objects will have a valid method. That's more my thing. I mean, right there, that current user save, that would be where I would substitute in the service object, because then it would be update profile .call and pass in the user. That would be the style that I would use.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Bundle open is a great tip, by the way, and there's a command to reverse that after you're done hacking the gem to pieces and you want to put it all back.
Oh, yeah.
So there's gem pristine to reset it back to the packaged version. I just wanted to point that out.
I will start using that. It's a good point, because I lean on my Git tools all the time, but your gem directory is not version. So you start making changes, and then you're like, oh, where did I change this? Yeah.
Random log all the time, like, oh, where's that log coming from? Some like gem library
That you hacked like 2 weeks ago, yeah. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think I'm going to hand it off to Kyle after a short break. Thank you.